So when you come from that place, that Christian place, and then you move out of it, you begin with this, especially if there's a lot of personal sacrifice involved, you begin with a lot of belief that that's a real thing. And now I'm at a point in my life where I'm looking at what I touched upon. And this morning I reread just to kind of clarify. I was like, is that what she said? Because it really seems like that's what she said. So I'm going to read it to you. It's in chapter 22, section 9 and 10. It's not a lot. But basically, she's saying our ancestors in nature developed these systems to personify nature in a way so that we could contend with it on more than just one level. So storms and mountains, and you had a lot of animism at that point. So animals then represented whole categories of consciousness. And as more of our ancestors worked their minds toward this, they drew from the other side and coalesced these entities in Netzach. And then with language and description and art and formative structure like sculpture, they drew the essence of that natural function or universal concept into concrete reality. And it follows this lightning strike where it goes from Netzach, and you have Jehovah Elohim, the Lord of hosts, right? And I said the wrong name, but and it moves into Hod, where this amorphous gathering of host intelligence then is coalesced through the process of language in Hod, and then distilled down into our unconscious mind through Yesod and into Malkut, just right. It concretes there in the ethers of Yesod, and then becomes something of material importance to those of us in Malkut. What I'm paraphrasing because I then when you as you read it, you'll catch what she's saying. But um, what that means is that when I came into religion, I walked into an established egregore, an established cognitive thought form, a literal living, breathing cognitive thought form. Because as as this process happens, we ensoul that aspect of consciousness within the framework that we provide for it. And it it can take on a literal life of its own. It really means that all of these like Twilight Zone episodes and Star Trek episodes where they talk about being in a realm where our consciousness can affect material reality and draw forth from our imagination the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, say, right? The more we focus on those kind of entities and things, the more concrete they become within the consciousness of mankind, and the more apt they are at conveying power. Because what happens is we pour our soul into it, and there's a reciprocal relationship between that force of nature, so ensouled and embodied, and ourselves. So now that I've kind of just went on, the reason I'm hitting this is because then what the bottom lining this for everyone, this turns the gods into computer programs. That's exactly what they become. They are absolutely programs of consciousness. Now, I've stumbled across this concept while walking through the virtual imaginative halls of the Akashic record as a vast library. Because libraries are important to me and were important to me as a youth, they tend to become figurative when I choose to project myself into those realms. I'm very comfortable in a library. I know there are people there that can assist me, and I populate them in my imagination so that I find the assistance that I need. And often I'll draw from childhood librarian characters who were very helpful and very figurative in mind. So they, like contact, boom, that form's easy for me to deal with. You're now Madame Zoot, and I'll come in and I'll deal with Mrs. Zoot. She was my third grade teacher. Anyway, but so let me just read this to you guys, and then we'll discuss this a little
I'm
more.
following you with that. I like that.
Yeah, right. So in section 9 of chapter 22, this is on page 209 if anyone listening has the book, and it's the new one. When his mentality was still primitive, man worshipped these images by means of which he represented to himself the great natural forces so all important to his material well-being, thus establishing a link with them, by means of which a channel was developed whereby the forces they represented were poured into his soul, thus stimulating the corresponding factor in his own nature and thereby developing it. The first thing that came to my mind as I was reading this was war gods, and seeing these depictions of gods of war and their absolute savagery, and that becoming an inspirational thing to a warrior like a Roman legionnaire, looking upon the god Ares and recognizing that the color red is sacred to him, and I'm filled with it. Therefore, I am an avatar of Ares, and I will go forth and rah, you can just feel it. Takes nothing for me to tap into that. Like, that is so well reinforced because of our culture and the fact that Ares has been honored forever, like just that entity of war and polarization and destruction and order all bundled up. Yeah, and so the idea then, and then of course Ares is also a priest going out and proclaiming goodness and light and order and salvation, and because that's also polarization. Turn your back against the things which bring you down. Repentance means to turn around. That's literal polarization. To go the other direction. That's like switching the switch, and now I'm going that way. You know. So anyway, let's keep looking at this. The operations of this worship, especially when it became highly organized and intellectualized, as in Greece and Egypt, built up exceedingly definite and potent images. And it is these that are generally understood as the gods, because they are so definitive. They have it's part of the reason why when I first started looking at Bronze Age cultures and Stone Age cultures within the Middle East and through the Mediterranean, there was a point in my study where I was angry at Alexander the Great. I was freaking furious that he had Hellenized Egypt the way he did. The truth is, he actually probably saved Egypt because it was imploding, because they literally are like, oh, you're here to conquer us? Come on in, because their government was for crap. They had a dynasty of inbred people that was ridiculous, and would continue to be ridiculous going beyond him. So it's, when you look at Cleopatra's pedigree, it's like looking at a bowl of spaghetti. That's not my quote. That's a genealogist describing it, because it goes all the way. Anyway, so but they designed the system that is definitive, and why it's important is because we have a correspondence every time we see the night sky. We have a correspondence every time we look at astrological forces, and we recognize that there's also, while this is kind of an abstraction of a force, it might also be descriptive of those actual planets and the energies that they might bring with them. So perhaps as Mars would move across our horizon, and we were much closer at that point, wars would break out for reasons. Who knows? I mean, we know electromagnetically a simple solar flare or a lot of solar activity can greatly change our consciousness. Well, what if Mars was lit up? What if it's just its passage and its electromagnetic output caused rage to happen? It definitely gives us tie to the whole Harry Heroes thing, and how you get this werewolf manifestation with the appearance of the moon. We say this moon now, but maybe it was that moon then. I don't know. Like it's one of those things where you have to begin to speculate. We do know that Mars was close enough that when you look at the Aztecs and Mayans and their depiction of their god of war, they saw him more as an adolescent with acne. It's really fascinating when you read that, which means that they were looking at it much closer and they saw all the scarring on the face
Mm.
and stuff.
Mm.
And he was called Scarface to them. So they could see Valley Marineris there, that giant gash across the surface, which is completely, you can't see it. There's no way anyone, even assisted, we can't see it. You know, with a telescope and modern stuff here on the ground, it's virtually impossible for an ordinary human being to do it. You need college and all that other stuff. But for them, they saw it. They described it in their mythologies, which means it had to have been closer, which means its a proximity had to have had an impact. Certainly Venus and its passage had impact because she's associated with thunder, lightning, rain, storms, all kinds of other things, environmental catastrophes. She is the disaster or dire star. So, you know, she is the beautiful goddess who turned into Medusa and was cast out of the temple, you know, which would be descriptive of another mythology. But so it's so I wonder if that then they were looking at that and their conceptualization of those gods and the reason they evolve and change over time um, could be because we were trying to encode a cognitive thought form and then present it. And as things have mellowed, and we remain pretty much unharmed by the gods anymore. They've departed, and we have the God up there, right? You know, it's the only one left. As all the others have departed, their aspects have diminished. I think, using a quickie Star Trek example, um, there is an episode in the OG Star Trek where Captain Kirk finds a planet with Apollo. He reaches out with a big hand and grabs the ship. It's classic. And then he pulls them down, and Apollo has a big machine that empowers him based on the faith of the people there. It literally was Gene Roddenberry outing this process of we've got a machine and it ties us to that entity on the other end. And the more we dump energy into it, the stronger that guy gets. And the stronger that guy gets, the more we get from him. But there's a machine in between. And Gene Roddenberry in that episode totally outs this entire process and shows that when we stop using the machine, they dissipate and go back into the ether, which is exactly what Apollo does at the end of that episode.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, so let me continue here. So generations of worship and adoration built a very strong image in the astral light. And when a sacrifice is added to worship, the image is brought a step farther down the planes into manifestation. It makes me think of, I've always wondered what exactly were the Mayans and the Incas thinking when they were just gutting each other by the thousands, you know? I mean, the record of the conquistadors, the blood was in the streets and there was no exaggeration. And we know that that's possible because when you read farther back during the time of 0 CEE, you know, BCE, the Common Era, in other words, when Jesus was walking around, the Temple of Herod would have, during the Feast of Tabernacles, they'd have massive animal sacrifices, and they had gutters that would have animal blood just running through the the temple was a charnel house back in the day. How people got close to God with the smell of barbecue going from the burnt offerings and because they were cooking fat in those burnt offerings, so that smelled probably pretty tasty. And then all the other stuff, I mean, it was just a carnival. But anyway, so generations of worship and adoration built a very strong image in the astral light. And when sacrifice is added to worship, the image is brought a step farther down the planes into manifestation and acquires a form in the dense ethers of Yesod, and is a very potent magical object, capable of independent action when ensouled by the concrete ideas generated in Hode. This is also how to create a servitor. This is how to generate and create a servitor. And right here, boom, tree of life guiding you on the specifics. And when you work in the realm of Hode, language is everything and specifics are everything. Because the more specific you are, and that's an aspect of polarization that descends down from Gavora, who's saying it is this and not that, this and not that. And what does that sound like? That's binary. That is computer speak.
Yeah.
If I write a program in binary, it's this, not that. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, 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 no, no, no. It's one or the other. And as you are narrowing it down, using that idea of straight and narrowing, meaning it comes in like the Straits of Juan de Fuca. It doesn't mean that it's scary. It means that it's a really narrow passage between some islands, you know? And so straight and narrow is narrow and narrowing by impact. It's like a funnel. So as you're doing that, you are defining your cognitive thought form and supplying it the vestments necessary to become a thing, like to actually work for you. Just keep in mind that its operation exists within the etheric realm of Yesod. So, and because Yesod is connected to Da'at through the ether, you then can move and use your avatar. I've mentioned this before, where you can create embassies. This is how that embassy, I've been trying to find the language to explain how this is it. This is how that embassy is created, by defining it, by giving its characteristics. And the important thing above all else, which she emphasizes later in the chapter, is that if you are in Hode, for it to work, it must have an element of Netzik in there. You follow your instincts. If it doesn't feel right, that's not what it is then. You're drawing, it's so chicken and egg, it is crazy. Because are you drawing upon something that you made up, or are you describing something that you're connecting to? Or both? Or is this something that was already visualized by someone else, and because you are now walking through the same steps that some person 1,000 years ago may have done, you're able to just bridge that gap instantly because the akashic record exists without time. So if it happened then, it's now, and anything that was known can be known because it's known, and all things are known. So it's just a matter of walking down the path to get to the right book in the library, knowing that Dewey Decimal Code. So wrapping up here. So yes. Oh yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Now we're in section 10 because we finished with Hode. We see then that the very celestial being conceived by the mind of man has at its basis a natural force, but that upon the basis of this natural force is built up a symbolic image represented thereof, which is ensouled and rendered active by the force it represents. So you don't have to know how it works. Just doing it gets it to work because there's action taking place on the other end. It literally is one of those, if you build it, they will come. And in this concept, literally, you're creating a beacon within Malkut that's calling out and up into Yesod, but also then branching in both directions. Because the bottom section's really a quaternary. It's not really a trinary like all the ones preceding it, because Malkut is the combination of everything else that is above it. It couldn't exist without Netzik and Hod and Yesod doing what they're doing. And all of them, all of them are actually creating the earthing process. And that's what she gets in later, as she definitely points out, that as you're working through this process, you become the anchor, you're earthing this. You're pulling it in. So continuing on, the image then is but a mode of representation indulged by the human mind for its own convenience. But the force the image represents, and which ensouls it, is a very real thing indeed, and under certain circumstances can be exceedingly powerful. In other words, although the form under which the god is represented is pure imagination, the force associated with it is both real and active. And so it's exactly that Star Trek episode where you've got the Apollo and he's on the other side and he's using the machine that we built to do. We built that machine. He didn't build it. We built it. He's just using it to concrete himself and give himself powers here that we expect him to have.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the tree then and understanding this stuff, you know, and working through the tree, it becomes super duper important to get a grasp on the mythological correspondences and to put some flesh and blood on those guys. They can't be some sterile plain statue standing there, you know, doing the pose. You know, they got to have some real life. That's why I think it astonishes people when they start learning about Mediterranean Bronze Age culture and the fact that these people had garish statues. They were painted with vivid, bright color, and the eyes were painted. The fact that we see these statues now and there's nothing on them, that's often an artifact of just it's been a long time and no one maintained it. So it just was removed because it was all chipping off or whatever. But the older statues, the stonework that you see in Sumer and throughout Egypt and all these older areas, they were all painted. Everything was painted. The Sphinx was painted. It was all bright and vivid and colorful as a means of helping people understand the cognitive thought form. It's not just the shape it occupies, it's all the colors that are upon it, you know. And so that's each one of these gods then become like a tarot card all in themselves because they've got the complete thing. They're dressed, they have a context, right? Diana has her animals that are around her, as does Ares, as does Jupiter, who sits there on his throne, right? Enthroned, central, with an eagle. Like, so it gets, when you realize they're more than just that, then we have access to the power they represent. And then we can hybridize that power. We can use it as a vessel so that you might want to have something that's sort of Mars and Hode together. That wouldn't be unusual. It just requires you to create a Venn diagram between the two spheres and recognize that the path that exists between them, which is now a new circle or a vesica Pisces, that because the two spheres are interlocking, is just that path, and that it already exists, and here it is, you know, it's right there on the tree. That's what you're striking for. So a lot of times finding that sweet spot between them and hybridizing them involves using a major arcana and then being specific as to what world the energy came from, in elementally speaking, and what world that energy is descending into. So it's not simply I'm looking at the tree in Braya and it's this nice clean thing. I could be visualizing the tree in Absolute, and the energy is descending from Gevura in Absolute to Hod in Asaya. And so that major arcana card that exists therein will have that blending of energies, both as a descent from one to the other, but also as a process of transmutation. And that's the alchemy of the tree. And I'm so glad I've many of these books. I'm right now in the Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Me too.
Really? Isn't it awesome?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I started right at
is.
page 1 and just started working my way through. And
it is. I was totally shocked because I saw it just as some that was just a collection that was too much, and then I started to read, and I thought,
yeah,
oh
it's awesome. It's
yeah, it
amazing. He
is.
goes through this
It is.
whole thing and gives you all
Yeah,
the stuff, and you're just like,
yeah,
this is where
yeah,
all that thinking came from.
yeah,
And I'm just like, I'm just eating it up. So I
yeah.
went to
Me
Audible
too.
because it was so good. I'm like, I gotta listen to this all the time. And I went and got a
Yeah,
copy. And the guy
yeah,
who reads it on Audible is actually pretty good.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so I'm listening to it at the same time when I don't have, because reading takes forever some days. Because this isn't like John Grisham novels where you can just
No,
blow
no,
through them. If
no,
I'm
no.
reading this stuff, I'm not kidding. I've got this chart here, I've got
Yeah,
this chart
yeah,
over here,
yeah,
I've got
yeah,
my deck right here, because
yeah.
she'll say some stuff and I'll be like,
Yeah,
huh. And then I gotta
yeah,
stop
yeah,
right there,
yeah,
like I was reading through with you guys, and I'll read 3 lines,
yeah,
stop, and I'm
yeah,
there for 15 minutes in
yeah.
meditation and
Yeah,
contemplation of the
because
dream.
he says so much in so little text, actually.
Yes, he does. It's
Yeah,
amazing. So
yeah,
anyone listening to this later, Secret Teachings of All Ages by
yeah,
Manly P. Hall, totally
yeah,
worth your time. It
yeah,
is really good.
yeah,
I'm delighted that you're reading it too. That's
yeah.
so cool.
No,
I'm just like, I always
yeah,
love it because I like to find out what people are reading. Not everyone reads
yeah,
stuff. I have
yeah,
constantly, I'm not reading. I've got an audiobook or two running in the background. I mean, that's just, there's always
yeah. And
something.
me too. But
You know.
this I also have as a Kindle copy,
Do you?
and
Yeah.
it's good to check the text also
Yes, it
and
is.
to
And
read it.
yes,
And the book is it's too thick to have as a book, I think, because I want to have it digitally so I can find exactly what I am searching for.
I absolutely agree. In fact, when I'm reading it, I'm taking it out of the Sacred Text Archive. I'll
Yeah,
see if I can
yeah,
pull that up.
yeah, yeah,
Well, you guys know I have it, but it's in there,
yeah,
and then you can
yeah,
just read
yeah,
it on your tablet
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah,
or on your phone, which is what
yeah.
I do, because a lot of these books I can't carry around, man. This one I
No,
carry around. There's a few
yeah,
others back
yeah,
here I carry around,
yeah,
but surprisingly, I keep scriptures on me all
yeah,
the time. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
surprising how much the Bible can
yeah,
be good for you.
yeah, yeah.
But beyond that, though, it's
No,
yeah. If you don't do this every day, like that's the
no,
other thing. People are like, "How do you
yeah,
become a master at this stuff?" And it's
yeah,
like you just have to swim in it, just
yeah,
totally, like just immerse
yeah,
yourself. That's why
yeah, yeah, yeah,
audiobooks are good, because then if
yeah,
you are doing yard work, like I'm hoping to get done later, then you just
yeah,
pop that on, and boy,
yeah,
it makes the work go by so much better too.
yeah,
It
yeah,
just does, because my
yeah,
brain is out here and my body is an
yeah,
automatic pilot cleaning things up,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So it's
And Audible has produced a lot of esoterical literature lately. I found, because all of the Blavatsky texts are as audiobooks now.
yep, I
So you
got
can,
Cosmogenesis about a
yeah,
month ago.
me too,
Did
actually.
you really?
I I got I got all of them, actually, because I got
Oh,
all. I haven't listened so much to them, but I listen sometimes.
oh, that's funny.
It's
Yeah, no,
it's
the
quite good.
Cosmogenesis is okay, although the guy reading that one is not as good as the guy who's
No,
doing the Secret
no,
Teachings of All Ages.
no, no,
Yeah. But they're not bad. I've had some
no,
horrible
no.
audio anyway.
Yeah,
But well, thank you for hanging out with me, you guys. I
yeah,
just wanted to share this, and I want you to realize
yeah,
this whole
yeah,
process to
yeah,
me, and I would think maybe for anyone else, but it becomes really humbling.